DRAM prices are skyrocketing right now. Let's see how that's going to work out for consumers. Heads, consumers lose. Tails, manufacturers win. Consumers lose. It's heads. In some of our price checks today, we found memory kits increasing by 169%, 116%, 181%, and similar. By hard dollar amounts, some of these have gone up by hundreds of dollars for kits of 32 gigabytes in a span of just 1 to 2 months. Higher capacities have gone up by $400 or $500 in some cases. At one point, we observed a 1% increase per day for 13 days. There's even new reports showing that these recent price increases are to blame for NVIDIA's potentially delayed unannounced Super Series refresh, with worries that the company will prioritize denser GDDR7 modules for workstation GPUs. Prices are skyrocketing due to a combination of things that we're looking into today. These include data center demand, suppliers understocking due to previous oversupply, and other factors that we'll explore. Something else to put on your radar is that NAND flash for SSDs will also go up, or continue to go up anyway, as enterprise demand ramps and as they compete for inventory. Historically, the DRAM market follows about a 4-year pricing cycle. It's kind of like our industry's version of Roman mythology, where we're just begging the 3 DRAM gods to bless us this given month with good DRAM prices for consumers. But unfortunately, the mythological pantheon of Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron only listens to the prayers of the companies that buy from them, not the consumers. So server demand is fundamentally altering the traditional nature of this market, which means that the DRAM industry is exiting that roughly 4-year cycle of memory pricing, and it's remaining elevated for longer than typical. For example, in OpenAI's partnership announcement with Samsung and SK Hynix as part of its Stargate project, the company stated it was, quote, targeting 900,000 wafer starts per month. Tom's Hardware reported that this, quote, represents around 40% of the total DRAM output, end quote, and that's globally. Suppliers have also begun doing the thing that they've been doing in GPUs, on the NVIDIA side, for example, for a while now, or on CPU side, sort of, with EPYC CPUs as opposed to Ryzen desktop, although that's a much better market for us consumers than basically any of these other ones. But the thing that they're doing in DRAM is diverting supply resources away from what would become desktop supply, consumer gaming type supply, and towards higher margin supply for things like HBM or like server memory. And today we're going to go over the memory prices and walk through some of the explanations for their meteoric rise. If your question is, can I do anything with the information? The answer is no. You can't, like, I'll just be upfront from you. You can't do anything with this information. The most you could do is maybe make a decision on when you want to buy, if at all, in the current market. But, you know, realistically, consumers have absolutely no control over any of this. So the most we can do is talk about it and give some explanation as to why it appears to be happening, and then maybe decide if it makes sense to buy something or not. But this is unfortunately in the hands of the 3 companies, basically. So anyway, let's get into it. Our deep dive special reports and research this month and next are brought to you by our AI Dystopia Kickstarter style store page, including our brand new Retro IO themed coaster packs. We're running this page to self-fund several upcoming investigations and deep dive reports, like a look into NVIDIA and Palantir's relationship, the overreach of companies coordinating with raids of people's homes for dev kits, and more. We have 4 backer tiers that include things like our new unhinged Vaporwave smiley t-shirts featuring a censored speech block, our 4-pack of Retro IO coasters with an old computer front panel housing 5¼ inch floppy bays, an old school gaming controller, an IBM Model M inspired numpad, and a GN logo with 80s and 90s PC housing. Other tiers include bonus videos and behind the scenes videos with our team, a small group Q&A live stream session with me where you can ask about the industry, the content, and testing, and Snowflake the data pirate doubloons we made, since every company seems hell-bent on returning to the golden age of digital piracy with their invasive practices. Your support during this next campaign is securing our budget for the next 3 months of deep dive content, including a road trip around the US to visit various data centers that will increase consumer energy costs and consume all the silicon, including RAM and VRAM. And if you live near one that's going in and you think is controversial, email tips@gamersnexus.net with the subject data center. Head over to store.gamersnexus.net to directly support this investigative series. Back to the memory situation. All right, so in today's video, we're going to focus on how DDR4 and DDR5 prices have changed over the last several months. DDR4 is unbelievably bad in terms of the price increases because you're getting hit from 2 sides. One is some of the supply going EOL, not making as much of it, and then the other one is it's expensive anyway. And so that's pretty bad. DDR5 is also high. We're going to dig into some of the spot prices as well. So they're just like gold and silver. There is a spot price for DRAM where you can monitor it day by day if you really want to. And then we'll dig into some of the memory market's conditions leading up to this point and attempt to dissect the different factors that have contributed to the current situation to get a better appreciation for it. And if you didn't already love AI and server companies and the companies obsessed with inflating themselves with the circular flow of money to make sure the economy doesn't explode, then now you'll appreciate them even more. Finally, in this video, we'll go over the DRAM industry's 2026 forecast. So let's get right into the price comparisons for the kits that you would actually buy. We'll start with a DDR5 price check. For this, we need to pick kits that have relatively reliable availability to make sure the prices aren't too impacted by simply being low stock at the retailer. This table focuses on kits of 2x16GB of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory with one kit each from 4 of the largest vendors. The table includes each listing's Newegg price in mid-September, which is prior to the most apparent price increases we saw in October, and then again in November. We originally collected prices for October, but we saw such an increase in the time between getting those prices and actually being ready to work on this video, which was like a 10-day period only, that we decided to recollect them and rework the video. So since September, G.Skill's Trident Z5 Neo RGB kit increased by $145 from $125 in September to $270 the following month, making it the highest priced kit on the table. Just from October 28th to November 13th, we saw an increase of 13%. That's nearly 1 percentage point per day in that time. Kingston's Fury Beast RAM saw a price rise from $137 to $267 for a 95% increase. Corsair's Vengeance RAM climbed from $135 to $230, seeing a 70% increase. Team Group's T-Create Expert Kit more than doubled in price from $93 in September to $250 by the end of October. This is a 169% increase in a span of a little over a month. Just since October 28th, we've seen a 16% increase in price from $215 to $250. Broadly speaking, we're seeing around a $130 price increase on this spec of kit since September. The average percent increase in price of comparable kits is in the range of around 100%, depending on if you expand the scope to other kits. We also looked at some faster DDR5 kits to try and determine whether the substantial price increases would impact higher-end consumer kits disproportionately. Because high-end kits are less desirable in server deployments. You normally need ECC there anyway, but because the speeds are less useful there while being just more expensive because it's a higher speed, it's an interesting data point. This table of DDR5 7200 32GB kits shows that prices basically follow the exact same pattern seen with DDR5 6000, despite the enthusiast positioning. Naturally, the faster kits cost more in total, both in September and currently, with average prices of $152 and $296, but the percent increase in price is nearly identical for both DDR5 speeds. The Corsair kit went up by $105 or 62%. In just the last 2 weeks, the broken out increase was 10%. G.Skill's Z5 Royal kit increased by $130 or 81%, with the Z5 RGB kit now at $340 from $148 or a 130% increase. The Team Group kit went more than 2x here at $280 from $130 a little over a month prior to our data collection, so that's a 115% price increase. Average price increase of these was around 100% across a 1 to 2 month window for this speed. A quick glance at other speeds suggests similar trends. The recent price increases look to have impacted all DDR5 speeds mostly proportionately, which unfortunately suggests that no options are safe from the absurd price hikes we've seen recently. DDR4 is next. The memory is still relevant for AM4 platforms, home lab type uses, and people who are just building stuff that is perfectly useful just on an older platform, but it's also interesting because DDR4 has had its production wind down over the past couple years. This could have a compounding effect of price hikes plus dwindling supply. We'll focus on kits of 2x16GB DDR4 3200 CL16 with an expanded date range of June 1st to November 13th. There was the most data for this spec, so that's why we chose it. Using PC Part Picker's current memory price trend graphs, we found that, unlike DDR5, which only saw prices beginning to increase in September, DDR4 encountered 2 noticeable increases this year. The first was in June, likely due to several DDR4 EOL announcements around then, and then again in October. October coincides with the more recent climb in prices generally. The EOL announcements would coincide with a reduction in new supply. Since June, Corsair's Vengeance RGB kit climbed in price from $84 to $170, or 102%. Corsair's Vengeance LPX RAM saw price grow by $95, from $55 in June to now $150. The price of G.Skill's Ripjaws 5 kit rose considerably from $52 to $146, or 180% higher than it was. Kingston's Fury Beast increased from $55 in June to $145 presently, a 163% increase in a span of months. Compared to DDR5, DDR4 saw greater price increases by percentage, which we think is a combination of DDR4 memory still being in demand for both servers and consumers, while also winding down production or going EOL with some supply. All right, so next we're going to look at some of the spot prices, and we'll look at them for DDR4 and DDR5. Spot price, again, is just like a spot price for any other type of thing you might trade, except this one is memory. Nikkei Asia Review states that, quote, spot transactions are estimated to account for less than 10% of the overall DRAM market, end quote, noting that DRAM distribution tends to go through middle people rather than direct sourcing. The memory sticks are made in SMT lines with brands like Corsair, Kingston, G.Skill, so forth, doing testing and configuration of the kits, plus potential binning. You can see that in this footage from our factory tour of V-Color's RAM binning and manufacturing line previously. What's important here is that these manufacturers buy the memory itself, the silicon, from one of three common suppliers: Samsung, SK Hynix, or Micron. IC Insight's 2021 report indicated only 6% share for others. Anyway, we'll get back to the spot price, but the point is that it's basically three main suppliers kind of controlling this market. Now, the stick makers can still benefit from price changes. They could also be damaged by price changes, just depends. But if you're sitting on a ton of inventory of your memory sticks and the price suddenly skyrockets because there's a ton of demand and you haven't sold all the stuff at the last price, then feasibly increasing the price of that existing inventory, that would be beneficial. It would increase the margin on the inventory that's already in. So down-chain stick makers can still benefit from up-chain supply price changes. Just depends on what inventory they have. DDR5 sticks have a higher cost per stick on average, but DDR4's spot price far outweighs DDR5's. At the time of writing this, DDR4's 16 gigabit spot price saw a session average of $24.55. DDR5 16 gigabit solutions at 4800 and 5600 were $15.20 for the session average. And these are not directly comparable by capacity and speeds, just due to the differences in DDR4 and DDR5, but the session change is directly comparable. So in the very least, you can see session over session, these all have increases. DDR4 is disproportionately expensive at this stage, even with the fact that it's going EOL. And based on our understanding of spot price, we'd assume DDR4 prices will eventually cost more than DDR5 just in total, as RAM vendors sell out of their remaining wafer supplies, but really depends if there's still enough demand to keep the price elevated. For a sense of how rapidly these changes are taking place, this TrendForce chart shows DDR4's spot price increases on a week-to-week basis. From the week beginning October 22nd to the following week, DDR4 average spot prices increased for all quantities and speeds offered, with increases of 7.05% on the low end and up to 22.38% on the high end. This is just the week-to-week pricing as well. While it's not shown on the chart, TrendForce claims DDR5's price inflated by 30% in the same week. The analysis firm attributed the rapid increases to what they call severe hoarding as buyers rushed to stock supplies. We'll come back to spot prices later, but let's get into some of the history for the DRAM market in general. It's interesting. The DRAM market hasn't really been normal since COVID, but to be fair, the DRAM market has a uniquely corrupt history in PC hardware, and that includes indictments, convictions, and I believe the phrase is cartels. And by I believe, I mean that is literally what they were called at one point. And so because of this, DRAM is known to have sort of a wild west of pricing, at least in the past already. But during COVID, when all the work from home PC builds were happening, as people were shifting their work elsewhere, needing duplicates of systems, things like that, companies bought a ton of hardware. That's when the real surge started to happen in DRAM. And as a result of that, manufacturers ramped production, but also DRAM companies in particular seem to not like oversupplying their product because it can water down how much it sells for. Unfortunately, or maybe not, the heightened demand was extremely short-lived, mostly due to inflation and general uncertainty. Manufacturers quickly found themselves overstocked with inventory nobody wanted, and eventually resorted to cutting production levels in the years that followed. The most significant cuts occurred in late 2022 and early 2023. Around the same time, global DRAM revenue decreased by an unprecedented 30% quarter over quarter in Q3 2022. Certainly, we can all shed tears for the poor memory manufacturers. Speaking of cartels, the DRAM market is so sensitive to supply and demand that in the past, we've seen the largest manufacturers actually engage in price fixing in the segment, which results in, in other words, a sort of gentleman's agreement of, hey, if you lower your price and we lower our price, then both of us make less money. What if we agree to not do that below a certain amount? And this is how you get price fixing. And this has been busted in the past in the memory industry. It doesn't mean it's happening right now. I'm just saying, there sure is a history of it. In 2006, the Department of Justice indicted 2 executives from Samsung and 1 from SK Hynix for, quote, their participation in a global conspiracy to fix DRAM prices, end quote, after evidence showed that the competitors had basically agreed on pricing together. In 2022, another antitrust case was filed, though the case was ultimately dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The point is, the DRAM market is volatile. Do you see what I... Manufacturers commonly reduce the output to stabilize the pricing. We've seen this for actually probably decades now, but in particular over the last 5 or so years. It wasn't until the end of 2023 that prices had finally begun to improve in the manufacturer's favor, a result of the substantial production cuts made since COVID. Throughout 2024, prices gradually increased as the market returned to an equilibrium, bringing us to 2025. Other historical sensitivities, just for context, have included earthquakes and other natural disasters, such as in Taiwan in 1999, or in South Korea in 2020 due to a power outage that destroyed millions of dollars of inventory. Reuters also notes that a 30-minute outage in 2018 cost $43 million in losses, including wafer losses. More recently, the natural disaster is less natural and more of an artificial disaster because AI server demand has driven the price through the ceiling, as we'll talk about in a moment. There's another aspect to this market too, which is that although the demand for desktop consumer DDR5 is maybe weaker than they would like to see for reasons known as consumers getting fucked over by basically every company right now, firms like TrendForce indicate that the demand for business solutions like HBM and server memory is strong right now. So enterprise and server users are typically on ECC RDIMMs. These are error correcting solutions as opposed to the non-ECC UDIMM DDR5 for most desktop use cases. So manufacturers were quick to capitalize on the emerging DDR5 demand, especially with the current data center frenzy right now, where they're all sending hundreds of billions of dollars between each other. And if you're curious about that, we have a whole video on our GNCA channel that I'll link below called What the Fuck is Going On? And it talks about the big circle of money between the companies. But that's more of the background to this. Found via Tom's Hardware, Samsung recently raised RDIMM contract prices by as much as 50% for fourth quarter 2025, and major buyers are now reportedly receiving only 70% of the server DRAM ordered. In an October 2025 report, TrendForce highlights server memory's growing popularity, stating, quote, server shipments and per-system memory density are rising in tandem, driving significant bit demand growth and extending the supply-demand gap across calendar years, end quote. And then there's HBM. Demand for HBM really took off this year as a result of its use in several of the high-end data center GPUs that are being sold to everybody now. High bandwidth memory had numerous attempts at deployment on the consumer GPUs in the past, but ultimately was too expensive to make sense, especially for the architectures they were paired with. The quick version is instead of memory modules laid side by side in these separate discrete packages surrounding the chip, like on a RAM stick or around a GPU, HBM stacks the memory dies and is able to pack them into a denser area on an interposer often to get them closer to the GPU or the CPU. In terms of resource usage, TrendForce states that, quote, HBM consumes over 3 times the wafer capacity of standard DRAM, end quote. Not only is there stronger demand for server DDR5 and HBM, but there's also reportedly higher margin from it, causing manufacturers to prioritize their wafer production towards those products if they're able to sell them. Server DDR5 and HBM demand isn't just higher than desktop DDR5 RAM. Its demand is unprecedented for the DRAM industry, and it's altering the market's nature. Digitimes Asia explains, quote, "The memory industry has historically followed a cyclical pattern, with each cycle lasting about 3.5 to 4.5 years. However, this AI-driven cycle is abnormal. The upward cycle is being stretched, and cyclical regularity may be disrupted. Downstream customers expect the shortage boom to last at least 4 years or more," end quote. As seen in this long-term trend of DRAM spot prices 2000 to 2025 graph found via Jukan on Twitter, DRAM spot prices typically peak early in each generation's lifetime, with highs usually between $8 and $10. This highlights the spot prices of DDR5 and of DDR4 EOL of $15.22 and $24.55 as outliers. Some of this has to do with actual cost increases from higher-end technology, better process nodes, and just inflation, but we think a lot of it also has to do with memory business learning how to fine-tune the point at which people just won't pay more. Digitimes Asia also describes how the newfound demand is shifting dynamics between manufacturers and customers, saying, quote, "The competition for goods is no longer among pure module makers, but against cloud service providers with orders of magnitude larger," end quote. They may have left out the word orders there. We get the point. In OpenAI's partnership announcement with Samsung and SK Hynix, the company described plans to target, quote, 900,000 DRAM wafer starts per month, end quote, which Tom's Hardware notes represents around 40% of the total DRAM output globally. Now, looking ahead to the next year, in TrendForce's 2026 memory price forecast, the company projected a structural memory price surge, as they called it, in 2026, led by, they say, 1, AI servers, requiring large DRAM and NAND orders, and 2, profit prioritization from manufacturers, shifting resources towards server applications. Now, regarding the DRAM market as a whole, the analyst firm expects, quote, AI infrastructure expansion by CSPs, or that's the cloud service providers, creating supply shortages. Server DRAM receives preferential supply, forcing price increases in PC, mobile, and consumer DRAM applications, end quote. And remember, DRAM is in basically every meaningfully expensive modern electronic component. I mean, you find it all the way down into a fridge these days, but most commonly you're going to find the expensive amounts of it in handheld gaming devices, consoles, PCs, laptops, phones, even SSDs sometimes have DRAM. So in addition to DRAM, the company also expects AI server and cloud computing demand to cause NAND flash pricing to rise, reiterating the recent remarks by the head of Phison. In October 2025, Phison CEO Kwok Hein-sun warned of severe NAND shortages to come in 2026, even claiming, quote, "I think supply will be tight for the next 10 years," end quote, citing a combination of limited investment for the last few years as well as data center storage as the primary driving force. NAND flash here is what's used in solid-state drives, flash drives, anything like that that has a non-volatile storage. Of course, ignoring solutions like spinning disks. For one final thing, NAND prices and GPUs come into play here too. While not directly impacted by the DRAM changes, the NAND industry, so flash storage for things like SSDs, is expected to undergo a similar experience, and it's already begun. This month alone, SanDisk raised its November contract prices by 50%. Samsung is reportedly considering 20 to 30% price increases for its overseas NAND supply in 2026. Phison CEO stated, quote, "The price of a 1 terabit TLC NAND jumped from $4.80 in July 2025 to $10.70 in November 2025, marking an increase of over 100% in less than 6 months," end quote. As for video cards, they're affected because memory is on video cards, so these DRAM price increases will impact the entire PC industry. There were rumors recently about NVIDIA maybe canceling and then maybe not canceling, but actually it's delaying its 50 series super refresh to Q3. They're not announced yet, so whether you can cancel or delay an unannounced product is maybe a different question, but currently the rumor is maybe delays. And as the company prioritizes its denser modules towards workstation GPUs, at least the ones that don't have HBM, then that will also affect pricing and availability for consumers. And Asus recently warned that it may have to increase its prices to reflect the differences in RAM. So to quickly recap, DDR4 and DDR5 pricing has nearly doubled within the past few months. AI infrastructure and cloud service providers have driven demand to unprecedented levels, everyone's favorite word. Manufacturers had been cutting supply to deal with the effects from the COVID overstock, leaving them unprepared for the sudden demand. Now, the cynical among us might say, do you mean that wasn't planned? Interesting. Now, the manufacturers have begun shifting DRAM supply resources towards AI and server uses, rather than desktop. It's unlikely that prices will improve in 2026 based on the reports from people who know a lot more about the DRAM industry than us. And finally, industry leaders are indicating that NAND price increases will follow in a similar fashion. Basically, the DRAM industry is undergoing the same thing we think that happened to the GPU industry over the past few years. And if you're wondering if things are going to get worse, the answer is yes. It's probably going to get worse. And that's not sensational framing. It is not good for consumers right now, and the data that presently exists for this market suggests that it will get worse, or in the very least, remain elevated for an extended period of time. So it might be a while before things drop back down. Now, businesses have realized that they can utilize hardware for so-called A, so-called I, so-called use cases. And whether that has any actual commercial value that gets realized by anybody at any point doesn't really matter, because it does have shareholder value right now, and that makes stock go up and money go big. And money big, good, stock up, good. Bar low, bad. So right now they're going for bigger bar better, and that means RAM gets more expensive. Data centers are willing to pay more for what they're buying than consumers are. That's just always how it's going to be. As for suppliers, they can prioritize production of higher margin products by taking capacity that might otherwise have been allocated to some lower end component and trying to get the supply up for higher margin things, even if the yields are maybe a little bit worse. It's still going to be a higher margin. So this leads to a squeezed supply, which inevitably will just kind of create this cycle of surging the prices further. So wafer supply is limited. If a part gets allocated to something that should go in a data center, that part inherently will not be used. That wafer will inherently not be used for a consumer stick of memory, or at least you're trading off supply in just raw quantity of the memory that's ultimately getting made because of that. So those wafers are limited, and NVIDIA GPUs are a good example of this, where, as it's been known for a while now by basically everyone who watches this channel, I think, NVIDIA's transformation has been allocating their supply to the high margin, multi-tens of thousands of dollar solutions, not to the gaming parts. You kind of see this in AMD with EPYC and Ryzen CPUs, but the Ryzen CPU prices have overall remained more competitive and haven't seen that same sort of surge that we've seen in GPU and now memory. And hopefully we won't see that in CPU, because that will fuck everything. That's the technical term for that. I asked an economist. I didn't actually, but I'm pretty sure that's the technical term. I just saw it in a book somewhere. Maybe this one. Now, in terms of advice, we can't predict the market. We're getting into territory where buying and selling memory might as well be trading gold. And so what's up today might be down tomorrow, and for that reason, we would hesitate to give any firm advice on whether you should buy or wait for your memory, because there's just no certainty. The bottom could fall out tomorrow of the AI bubble if, for example, some black swan event happens, like one of the big companies is found to be fraudulently representing what it's actually doing and the money it's making or something, or pumping figures in a way that shakes the stock prices to the core. That said, we can at least try to draw some conclusions from the data that exists, ignoring whatever types of events like that might happen. And from what we've read, assuming stability and that the trajectory remains on its current projected arc, it does look like the data currently supports that the price will either maintain or continue to increase into 2026. Now, I have covered this a lot of times in my, 17 years or so that I've been doing this now, and I can remember being on camera talking about, like, making jokes about how you might as well like buy memory and sell it later for more money, like things like that. We've covered this. I personally can't remember a time covering it where the prices have been this high, this fast. We're talking like 1 to 2 months skyrocketing. I think normally it's been a little more gradual. I might be wrong on that. I haven't gone back to check historically, but that's just my memory of the situation. So this is what you would call bad, and it looks like it'll get worse before it gets better based on what the sort of analysis firms are saying and what we're seeing in the market. So factor that into your buying however you see fit. It may make sense to go used where possible as well. Anyway, it is unlikely to produce any large savings waiting for Black Friday. You'll probably get something. I think the issue is, maybe this time more than ever for DRAM, obviously once those sales hit, it's like it's probably not even going to bring us back down to where we were like 2 weeks ago. And so, yeah, maybe cheaper, I guess, instantaneously. It doesn't really feel that good though. You're still getting kind of ripped off. It sucks. I don't know. It's like we've covered this stuff in the past. I remember covering this around the later half of the 30 series. I don't remember if DRAM was high yet, but I do remember that some of the prices for things like GPUs were going up at that time. There's not like a lot of solutions. I don't know. Buying used is probably one of the better things. That market's eventually going to tick up as well if it hasn't already. Fortunately, memory is one of the components that I personally feel more comfortable buying used than most other things. Storage devices I really don't want used for a lot of reasons. Security is one of them. Another one is something like an SSD. You don't know how much it's getting hammered by the user, and they've got kind of a limited life. They're pretty good these days, but don't really want that. GPUs, hit and miss, probably better than a lot of other components, but DRAM, I feel better about buying used. We've bought a decent amount of DRAM used for some of our NASs and things like that here, and I can't think of a time I've had a bad stick yet. So something to consider, but that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, go to store.gamersaccess.net to support us directly. If you want to help us out for the reporting we're doing, keeping you updated, and providing the independent deep dives we're doing, we have an active Kickstarter-style campaign going right now. So we finished the black market one. We've shipped most of that stuff now. We've got a couple things left on it we're clearing. And then for this next round, we're doing deep dives into a lot of the general, I'll call it corruption, and the dystopian future that we are currently living in for the, we're going to go with the technical word of bullshit that we are currently dealing with. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. See you all next time.